Maladaptive daydreaming for me is a purely negative experience. It's this coping mechanism that is used for anxiety, in my case. But it doesn't work, it just creates more anxiety. My issues with anxiety, they start when I'm 16. I'm this awkward teenager who doesn't know what they're doing with their life, and this sounds like every teenager, and that's what I thought up until that point. What happened was that I started getting bad grades. My grades were good. I was going to a good school, and grades were everything. And then all of a sudden, I'm having issues academically, and so this is a big issue. I'm sort of questioning whether I am just a normal awkward teenager or if there's actually something wrong. Like, I decide that there's something wrong because I have all these issues academically, and I have this existential problem, and my parents are getting divorced, and I just sort of can't handle it. So I go and see the school counselor, and we talk about all these issues, and she refers me to a psychologist. And we identify the issue as anxiety, which is a big step. I've got anxiety, and then I can't deal with it, and that's why I can't study well. So I start learning some cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, start learning some time management techniques, and that's helping me a little bit, but my grades are still terrible and I can't concentrate. That's really the issue. Like, I set up a good plan and I can stick to it to a certain extent, but then it comes time to sit down and actually do a bit of work, and I just can't concentrate, and I don't know why. So a little bit of this goes on until I get referred to a psychiatrist, and I get formally diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and major depressive disorder, and I start antidepressants. And then I do that for a little bit, and I start taking other prescribed drugs under the supervision of my psychiatrist. Graduate from high school, didn't get the score that I wanted, didn't quite overcome all of these issues, go into university, and I think, okay, I'm an adult now in the real world. I thought at the time that university was the real world, and I didn't know at the time that that wasn't the case, but I thought I can solve these problems on my own, so I sort of had been tapering back the therapy, and I decided to go out on my own. And I started mixing with perhaps the wrong crowd and started taking illicit substances to deal with my anxiety issues, and I was also on antidepressants still at that stage. I became depressed and anxious even more so than I was before. Like, I had been getting better, and now I'm getting worse. I decided to act on some suicidal ideation I had in the second year of uni. I had probably felt suicidal since I was 11. Like, it was this ever-present sort of thing that I had in the back of my mind, that I thought about at various times quite a bit. I ended up in hospital in an acute mental health scenario, and then graduated from that with the help of the acute mental health team, and then was urged to go back to the psychologist and psychiatrist, and it was kind of like starting again. Those same treatments, started back on the antidepressants and doing CBT. That year I failed the subject because I had a lot of other things going on. In addition to the anxiety and depression, I had that episode of acting on the suicidal ideation, and I was taking drugs that I shouldn't have been taking. And why I was doing that was probably because of the depression. I had given up more so than I had in high school. In high school, I was filled with hope and just trying my best to navigate life as a teenager with these anxiety issues. And that all sort of fell apart when I officially became an adult, and I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. The light at the end of the tunnel of high school is very clear. You just graduate and get to college, and now I'm in college, and I don't know what to do. So, in that same year, I go to the doctor for an unrelated health problem. I get a CT scan of my brain, and there's an incidental finding. There's nothing wrong with the scan except for this incidental finding. This is agenesis of the corpus callosum, which I'm going to refer to as ACC for that's the abbreviation. And this is a congenital malformation of the brain. It's something that you're born with. It's 1 in 3,000 cases, so it's rare. We don't know why most people are born with it. It's a little bit unfortunate. Sometimes you can have a tumor in your brain, and it is associated with alcohol and cocaine use in utero. My mom didn't do that, and I didn't have a tumor. So I'm in the majority camp of we don't know why this happened. As for why it wasn't picked up earlier in my life, I didn't have a scan of my brain. As for why it wasn't picked up in utero, I was born in 1990. That's a long time ago. And nowadays, we pick this stuff up all the time. I know this because I'm part of a charity for ACC, and we help mothers and fathers navigate their new life with a child who's newly diagnosed with this issue. And we also have adults who found out later in life, like me. It's mostly children and their parents. And we are picking this stuff up all the time now. Back then it was not so universal, using that technology, that scanning technology. So I've got this part of my brain missing, and we exist on a spectrum from very severe intellectual disability to very much a normal life. And many of us with ACC exist somewhere in the middle. I have issues with anxiety, which means that I have one of these behaviors associated with ACC that's quite common. Many people with ACC have issues with anxiety. So I'm like, okay, I decided that there was definitely something wrong with me at the age of 16, and now I'm 19, and I found it. I'm going to dedicate my life to solving this problem because it's a roadblock for everything else. And it kind of was a roadblock for everything else, this anxiety that I had. I wanted a career. I had to go to uni to get it. I couldn't do the uni very well. So I'm going to solve this problem. I built an identity around it. I joined this charity that helps people, and I'm currently writing a novel with a character that's got ACC, and doing all these other things to help people in the community because I want to do something with my life. And it's like, okay, why don't I do this? I haven't got a better idea. So I take this knowledge to the clinicians that I'm seeking treatment from. They haven't heard of it. They don't know what to do. So I get advice from researchers, and nothing really changes because we don't really know what to do. There's not a lot of research done on the ACC. So I'm still doing CBT, I'm still doing mindfulness now, and eventually I come off medication, and of course I clean up my act. I stop taking drugs. I graduate and I get a job. So I've got to clean up my act, and that's what I do. I then go to university to do something that I really wanted to do. And it's not that I didn't want to do what I did before, but I really wanted to give this a go. And of course I don't need help because I'm doing something that I'm passionate about. And I'm not going to have any trouble. And of course I do. So I do that for 2 years, and then I give up. And then I enroll in a master's degree, which I'm doing currently. This is a master's degree. It's an extension of what I'd originally done, and as you might guess, I'm doing a research project on people with ACC. And while this stuff is happening, I'm writing a novel for the person with ACC. I'm in this group, on the management committee of this charity, and doing research. I randomly, this is last year, I come across this term when I'm not looking for it, maladaptive daydreaming, and I immediately know that this is a big term. Like, this is something that I need to know about, something I identify with, and I know all this before I click the link. And then, of course, I click the link. I identify with all these terms associated with the maladaptive daydreaming community. I read a lot of the research, mainly by Eli Summer, the professor at the University of Haifa, that does a lot of the research associated with maladaptive daydreaming. He coined the term and all this sort of thing. And it starts making a lot of sense to me, this anxiety that I've had for 10 years now. I'm 28, so this has been over a 10-year journey to get to this point. So what starts making sense that didn't make sense before was precisely what is happening to me when I'm anxious. And so I set up this time management skill thing. I've got all those skills down. I've got the CBD happening. I've got mindfulness happening, and I'm still doing that today with a psychologist who's helping me get through my master's degree. But what's actually happening is I sit down, I do all the things I'm supposed to do, I sit down and I still can't concentrate. But now I know exactly why. It's because of this particular behavior that I have, that is the daydreaming, and I can describe it in terms of obsessive compulsive disorder. For myself, I know that not everybody can do that. I can see it as a subset of obsessive compulsive disorder. It can be my compulsion, for example, and we had discussed with my clinicians that were treating me that my compulsions were mental, which not everyone knows that's a thing that can happen. You can have mental compulsions, so not traditional physical things like washing your hands, for example, or something like that. The compulsive action is something that's going on inside my head, and so it doesn't really change the course of action, because of course in that case the treatment is the antidepressants that I tried, or the treatment, the psychological treatment that I was doing, CBT and mindfulness. And we have a little bit of literature. People with maladaptive daydreaming has taken similar drugs to what I took and done similar psychological treatment to what I've done, and they have benefited from that. But now it is really totally different, because I know precisely the target that I'm aiming for, and I know exactly when I'm feeling what I'm feeling, what it's going to lead to, and what I need to do about it. And it's not this broad, generalized issue with anxiety. It's this specific behavior that I can hopefully conquer. It's probably been about a year since I first came across that term, and I've told my psychologist about it, and my experience with that sort of mirrors my experience with ACC. They haven't heard of the term. They don't know what to do with it. So in that case, I tell them. So, for example, my experience with my GP when I found out about ACC was, he said something to the effect of, "Why should I learn about this? You're the only patient that I'm going to have that's going to have this, so there's no point in me learning about it." My psychiatrist said, "You're the expert in ACC, so why don't you tell me what to do?" That's what he said. And they're not wrong, in a sense. I felt like it was a call to action. So I've got to become this person that they think that I am. I've got to learn everything I can about ACC. And it's much the same with maladaptive daydreaming. My GP hasn't heard of it. I've got a new GP now. My psychologist hasn't heard of it. I've got a new psychologist now. So I tell them about the literature that I've read and how it relates to me. And of course, if it doesn't relate to me, I've also mentioned that to them. But of course, the literature that relates to me could be seen as a potential treatment option if they want to see it that way. And they have been incorporated in that sense. And one of the reasons why I think that's gone all right for me is because I do work in the healthcare industry, and they see me as a fellow clinician. And I can see how Having that clinician to clinician dialogue doesn't necessarily work if you're just a normal patient who has a experience in a different industry. So I totally understand how difficult it might be for patients to navigate explaining themselves to their clinician. I understand that from the ACC perspective when we talk to people in my charity about, what can you say to get your point across and get their attention and get the help that you need, get the help that the research says that you could get. So it's been probably a bit of luck that I've had both the experiences with ACC before and my clinical experience. So now that I know all this stuff, and I'm still doing uni, I have all these skills from maladaptive, not from maladaptive daydreaming, that's not, I have all these skills from the mindfulness therapy and CBT, and I can target them towards the maladaptive daydreaming. So it is about time management and planning and meditating. Getting rid of that anxiety that causes the behavior is kind of the ultimate goal. It's kind of like the maladaptive daydreaming is the language that we do it in, almost. When I'm sitting down and I can't concentrate, then I can target exactly what I need to do. For example, I've got a 3-minute timer that goes off every 3 minutes. It's you type in to Google 3-minute timer and it gives you one. There's no excuse. It doesn't get annoying because it either breaks me out of a daydream or it just, reminds me that I'm done well and I can keep going. It might be annoying if I wanted to daydream. And this is the thing. This is one of the things that I've learned, apart from being able to be more precise. What I've learned in this past few months as I've been teaching myself different things of how to solve this problem and reading the literature. It can have addictive qualities, this maladaptive daydreaming, and I do feel like I have an addiction and I act as though I do, and so we can do a lot of different things with addiction, and I use those tools to combat this, and I treat it like that, and I find that does work, and I haven't completely overcome my problems, but I find that strategy works. So it's like, okay, this 3-minute timer is not annoying, because if it is, then that might be the addiction speaking, and so I can't give it power. I have to treat it completely like it's a problem, because the reality is it is a problem. It doesn't help me in any way. It hinders me. It might be that it gets me through boredom on a car trip, for example, or something of that nature. But it's also this thing that completely has destroyed my life and made me depressed and led me down a suicidal path and many other things of that nature. So weighing up the benefits with these negatives, it's clearly very negative. And I could talk quite a bit about other strategies within the domain of mindfulness and CBT, but there's lots of resources on the internet about that, and it's just adapting those to the language of maladaptive daydreaming. So it's this behavior that comes up that is kind of like a compulsion for me in my case, and I've got to break out of it. And I've also, in the long term, got to manage my anxiety so that I don't get to the stage where I'm having these issues. And I don't get to the stage where I've wasted all this time and then my anxiety's worse. So that leads me to my typical day that I'll describe. This kind of puts it into a bit more context. I have triggers like everyone. Being alone, it's a very common trigger. Music's a very common trigger, so we've got to cut that out. I work with other people in a clinical setting, so there's not any sort of trigger for me to daydream, and I'm pretty good at that, and I've gone 8 hours or whatever without doing it, then I come home and I gotta clean the house. It's an excuse not to do uni, so I can only do it for an hour, and then I gotta give up. If I haven't cleaned the house, which I usually have because I've got an efficient sort of system, then it's too bad. And I check my emails for 10 minutes, haven't checked all my emails, then that's too bad. I check Facebook for 5 minutes, and if I haven't checked all of Facebook, then it'll have to wait till tomorrow. It's just too bad. Then I have 3 hours every day set for uni work, and I have breaks every half an hour, and I have the timer going off every 3 minutes, and I have in my schedule specific things written down that I'm going to do in that hour. It's not do assignment 1, it's write a paragraph about this, or find 5 sources or 10 sources for this in that allotment of time. And I'm going to do that, and let's say I waste 3 hours that day. That's 3 hours of work I've not done, and then now the next day I've got to do 6 hours. So I've got to read, set up my schedule, and that's a bit distressing, and it's more anxiety, and then more of an excuse not to get things done. So that's what that can look like, and you can see how that snowballs into an out of control situation. And now if I catch myself, the 3 minute timer sort of thing was meant to become a 5 and then a 10 minute and then a 20 minute timer. I've kept it at 3 minutes because I haven't improved my concentration. But what I have done is, saved myself a lot of time. If I've got a 20 minute timer and I start daydreaming, instead of losing, 18 minutes, I've lost 1 minute. And I can hopefully keep going that way. And if I can't be productive, I've got to step away and do something else. And that's a big thing for me, because I don't want to, because I want to keep daydreaming, and that's the addictive stuff. And now I know I have this addiction. That's how I treat it. I've got this multifaceted problem. I've got this anxiety issue, but it's also, I'm addicted to doing this behavior. So I have to step away. It used to be, oh no, I've really got to get this work done, so I'll sit here and be continue to be unproductive. It's like, no, I've got to step away, do something else, come back to it. And it's very much navigating that sort of anxiety, knowing what I'm feeling, and doing as much work as I can when I'm not anxious, and when I am anxious, dealing with that and trying to get a little bit of work done. It's very much incremental. It's kind of like the goal isn't always to get completely productive. No hours wasted. It's more like I wasted 2 hours yesterday, let's waste 1.5, and then bring that down to 0, sort of thing. And it's very much a whole, there's 8 hours spare in the day, 8 hours work and 8 hours sleep. You can't do 8 hours of work in that last third of the day. It's just not going to happen. You need to have a rest break and all these things. So don't have a crazy schedule that you can't manage. And that was a big lesson for me. That stems from perfectionism. This is it depends on how you conceptualize it, but that could be the root of all my issues, rather than the anxiety. It stems from perfectionism, which creates anxiety and so forth. And either way, I have all these things that I keep learning. Or what I have noticed though is I can't make it habitual. That's kind of the idea. Like you do this for 3 weeks, and then it becomes this thing that you can easily do. I smoked cigarettes for a year when I was a teenager and gave that up, and that was really hard for a while, and then got easy, and now it's not an issue. But this is every single day. I've got to work really hard to fight against the urges that I have to stay the same. And it hasn't gotten any easier after all this time, and I don't know if it will. I don't know if I'll ever finish my degree. I certainly hope so, but it's unclear at this stage. I'm doing better than I ever have, but I'm still not doing good enough. So that leads me to talk a little bit about what the content of my actual daydreams are. Hopefully that's enough context, and now you can imagine me wasting time and what I'm actually doing when I'm wasting that time. So I have these really long narratives that go for forever. I have two at the moment that have been going for about 10 years. I've had others in the past that have sort of ended, and I've certainly done it in my childhood. The daydreaming thing, in the format that I do it now, was something that I did when I was a kid. Of course, it wasn't a problem when I was a kid, so it wasn't maladaptive daydreaming as such, until it wasn't a problem until it became a problem. Much like obsessive compulsive disorder could be described. I mean, everybody does that to a little extent. It's not necessarily a disorder until it's bad enough, and everybody feels sad. It's not necessarily depression until it is, until it is severe enough. So my story is kind of a little bit like Elon Musk. One of them is like that. That's the best way to describe it. It, of course, this story started before he was famous, so I didn't know about him, and I hear about him a lot, and all these companies that he's created, and all these things that he's inventing, and all this sort of stuff, all these really intense things that he's doing, and all the success that he's had, and how he's you got all these even more elaborate and crazy plans to change the world. And my character is a bit like that, and it's sort of that story of that character doing that. That's one of the daydreams that I have. And the other one is kind of like alternative history. It's kind of like if you've ever played Sid Meier's Civilization series of video games, it's that. If I could describe it in a way that makes sense. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like what would have happened if these countries had done something different in its certain moment of history. And this is sort of like a big rabbit hole that you can fall down through, especially on the internet. There's all these forums, and you can go on, and it's sometimes it can be spoken of in very legitimate and academic ways of pondering history and the nature of people and all that sort of thing. This isn't like that. It's purely a waste of time. It's just this. That's the form of that narrative as best I can describe it in a way that makes sense. I have had other stories, but they're pretty much kind of maybe similar to the two current ones that I have. And I find that interesting in a way that I have a really bad imagination compared to other people that I've now sort of connected with on the internet, and they have all these different stories going on, and I kind of only have two that have been going on for a very long time. And another thing that I don't identify with is the idea that maladaptive daydreaming is a good thing, and I envy those that artists who have been able to use maladaptive daydreaming to their advantage. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. Of course, I'm writing a novel and I'm playing musical instruments. I draw, but I haven't seen this as a way to enhance that, and seeing them do it, I think all the more power to them. But to hear that they like something that I've built an identity around, trying to get rid of is kind of confronting. So if I can learn something from them and figure out how to use it to my advantage in my studies, and maybe finally finish some of these projects that I got going on, the novel and some other art stuff, then that would be something that would be great to come from the community. Otherwise, I'm learning more about the nature of this condition, and that has been helpful in itself. So that's really everything that I could possibly imagine saying about maladaptive daydreaming. I talk a lot about ACC to the ACC community. I could probably talk for hours about that, but I think that really wraps it up as succinctly as possible, and it's still probably far too long for somebody to sit through this and listen to it.